Good morning. Wonderful view from up here today. I'm going to start with a kind of peculiar story in the Bible. It's one of those blink and you'll miss it type of stories that you might read through it or read over it and not really get much out of it the first time. In fact, as I'm reading through this, if you'll turn to Judges chapter 12, you might be wondering where I'm going with this. Judges chapter 12. Now, most of our lesson is going to come from Psalm 12 that was read just a few moments ago. It's going to be the focus. We're going to talk about the words we speak. But like I said, I want to start somewhere a little bit different this morning. So in Judges chapter 12, just briefly, you've kind of got the struggle between those of Gilead and those of Ephraim. There was a war that came up, and Jephthah, who is the judge, the Ephraimites were called, but they didn't come and help when they're going to fight the armies of Ammon. Verse 1, "Why did you cross over to fight against the sons of Ammon without calling us to go with you? We will burn your houses down on you." That's what the men of Ephraim said to Jephthah and those of Gilead. Hey, you went and fought and you didn't invite us? In verse 2, Jephthah responded, "I and my people were at great strife with the sons of Ammon. When I called you, you did not deliver me from their hand." He said, hey, I called and you didn't show up to help. I think the men of Ephraim are just mad that they didn't get a share of the spoils. But at the end of the day, they called for help. And the Ephraimites did not come and help those from Gilead. Now, Ephraim and Gilead are separated by a river here. And so they have this big fight. Verse 3, "And when I saw that you would not deliver me, I took my life in my hands and crossed over against the sons of Ammon, and the Lord gave them into my hand. Why then have you come up to me this day to fight against me?" Then Jephthah gathered all the men of Gilead and fought Ephraim. And the men of Gilead defeated Ephraim, because they said, "You are fugitives of Ephraim, O Gileadites, in the midst of Ephraim and in the midst of Manasseh," saying, "You guys aren't even one of us," kind of insulting them. So a fight arose, and Jephthah and his men of Gilead won. And they captured some of the fjords of the Jordan, it said. And so they're holding this river crossing. Verse 5, as they hold this river crossing, and this is where the men of Ephraim who have just lost in this battle, they've got to cross the river to get back home and be safe. They're trying to sneak across and say, hey, we're just, one of you Gileadites. We're one of you, and we just want to cross over and conduct some business over there. And, so they're lying about who they are. So it says here in verse 5, "And it happened when any of the fugitives of Ephraim," those are the guys that lost, "said, 'Let me cross over,' the men of Gilead would say to him, 'Are you an Ephraimite?' If he said no," that is, he's lying about who he really was, "then they would give him this test in verse 6. 'Say now, Shibboleth.' But he said, 'Sibboleth,' for he could not pronounce it correctly. Then they seized him and slew him at the fords of the Jordan. Thus there fell at that time 42,000 of Ephraim." Okay, random story from the Bible, but there's a great point here. Your words reveal you for what you really are. And that's the question I want you to think about this morning. The language you use, the words you speak, who do you sound like? Do you sound like one of God's children? Or do you sound like someone from this world? We see this all over the Bible, even in the New Testament, Matthew chapter 26 and verse 73. As Jesus has been arrested, Peter is denying his association with Jesus. "I don't know this man." And they said, "Well, yeah, you're one of his followers. You sound like someone from Galilee. The way you speak gives you up." And if that doesn't make sense, let me use a modern illustration. We've got a lot of visitors here today for the wedding. We've got, both sides represented. On one side, we got family and friends from the West Coast, up in Washington and Oregon and that side of the country. On the other side, we've got people from back east and in the South. If I were to line up all the visitors and say, "Could you say you all?" I could tell you which ones are from Washington and which one of y'all is from the South. See, the way you speak reveals you for what you really are. So now I want to go to Psalm 12, and I want you to think about that as kind of the parameters for this study. In Psalm 12, we've got a Psalm of David, and he's going to talk a lot about the words of the wicked here in Psalm 12. And yes, And give something for you Marvel fans out there. This is a sermon about language. Watch your language. What words are you saying? What do you reveal about yourself? You might call yourself a Christian, but if you don't talk like a Christian, that's going to show you for what you really are. So in Psalm 12, we've got David in the first verse. He's writing a very similar thought that a lot of godly men over time have felt. I'm the only one left. Godly people are disappearing from the face of the world. So here in Psalm 12 and verse 1, help, Lord, for the godly man ceases to be, for the faithful disappear from among the sons of men. Does that remind you of, say, Elijah in 1 Kings 19? I alone am left, they've killed all of the prophets and no one speaks out for God anymore, and I'm the only one left. And God says, don't get too dramatic there, Elijah. I've still got 7,000 faithful left, a remnant. I've always got a remnant. God doesn't need the majority to win the fight. He just needs a remnant of faithful men. And there's always that. But sometimes we can't help but feel like David or like Elijah. Sometimes we look at the world around us. We feel so outnumbered. It's easy to relate to this and just feel like faithful are disappearing from the face of the world. Godly people are just ceasing to exist. You look around and there's hardly anybody who respects God anymore. And that's what he feels. All around him, David hears the language of the wicked. People who, by the way they speak, reveal them to be wicked, rather than the pure words of God. So Psalm 12 is very simple. The first 5 verses, he's going to talk about the language of the wicked. What characterizes evil speech? Speech is just an outward manifestation of the condition of your heart on the inside. So what characteristics give someone up as having a corrupt or evil heart versus the words of God in the last 3 verses? The words of God that are pure. Those are the kind of words we want to speak, the type of language we want. That's what we want people to hear when we talk, so that when they hear our words, they think of us as being with God, not as being with this world. So beginning in verse 2, we're just going to go through this kind of point by point. The words of the wicked characterized by David in Psalm 12. Now you get a lot of variety here depending on which translation you have. I believe our scripture reading was the King James Version, and I'm glad that version was read because it gives a little different translation on some of these words. I've got the New American Standard, but I'm going to read from a couple different ones throughout. Verse 2, they speak falsehood to one another. Now, you might think that I should put the word lying up there. Words of the wicked, they lie, they tell lies. I don't think that's exactly the idea here with falsehood. Other translations say, like the NIV, for example, says godless chatter. Others say speaking idly or empty talk. I think that's more the idea. Not that falsehood is wrong, but it means empty of truth, empty of value, meaningless. I believe the King James Version that was read for our scripture reading said vain. They have vain talk. We studied Ecclesiastes not too long ago, and vain means kind of pointless, meaningless. So he's characterizing wicked speech as being empty, devoid of truth, having no real value. Empty and false words are simply devoid of truthfulness. And you might wonder, what's the big deal? It's just words, right? Words, we give them meaning or value, and so it's not that big a deal, the words we say. Well, again, the words are just an outward sign of what's going on in your heart. When you start to adopt the empty language of this world, maybe imperceptibly you start to adopt their thought process. And all of a sudden, an unborn child is now simply a fetus, or even worse, just tissue. An abortion is now a medical procedure, or worse, an act of heroism. You see how you subtly buy into the language of this world, and now you're buying into their thought process here? There is no truth behind that type of talk. Alternative lifestyles. Gender is just a conscript or a construct of human civilization. It's not binary and has nothing to do with God. And so you buy into that language, and it just kind of shifts more and more that direction, further and further away from being based in truth. In 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 20, Paul is giving words of wise counsel to this young evangelist. And as he's concluding this first letter to Timothy, chapter 6 and verse 20, "O Timothy, guard what has been entrusted to you." That means when it comes to the words we speak, there's some guarding, there's some diligence involved with protecting the truth that should be planted in our hearts, that seed, the Word of God. We need diligence to protect it, to guard it, as he said to Timothy. Guard what has been entrusted to you, avoiding worldly and empty chatter and the opposing arguments of what is falsely called knowledge. There's a lot of cleverness behind some of the worldly speech, some of the worldly vernacular. It sounds clever. It's got the appearance of being thoughtful, intellectual, but it is not grounded in truth, and it is in fact simply empty chatter. How much of your speech could be characterized as empty chatter? And the same rules apply to the words we verbally speak. I think the same rules apply to the words we put out there in typing on the internet. I'm talking social media. I like social media. I like stalking people and checking in on people, and I love sharing pictures of my little girl. You know, I like it. There's good things to it, but there's great warning with it as well. I think it's just an outlet that makes it so easy to get on there and conduct empty chatter. Words that have no meaning, words that are not based in truth. And I've said it before that if you want someone, if you're doing something that people are telling you is wrong, if your brothers or sisters in Christ are challenging you, confronting you for something that you're doing that's sinful, and you want someone to take your side, just get on Facebook and vent, and someone will come, and a whole chorus of people will come and say, "You're right, you know, don't listen to them, they're just trying to tear you down." You want to find someone that'll support you in your sin? No problem. That's vain and empty chatter, though. So there's a lot of danger in social media out there as well. So understand that this is one characteristic of the words of the evil. It's empty. There's no truth in it. It has no meaning. It has no purpose. That's a question we need to ask before we talk, before we speak, before we type. Is there a purpose in what I'm about to say? Is there something useful? Is there truth in what I'm about to say? And I'm not saying speaking your truth. I'm saying the truth. In verse 2, a little bit later in the same verse, with flattering lips and with a double heart they speak. Flattery. Now, if you're like me, you like getting compliments. Feel free to compliment me after the lesson. If you're like me, you like compliments. You know, a kind word here or there. But flattery is not a genuine compliment. This is also translated as smooth talk. The intention behind this is to, butter somebody up, make them like you with the idea of you're going to get something out of this. It's very self-driven. It's very self-motivated. It's selfish at its core, that you're saying kind words to somebody. They might not even be true. You might not even really think that, but you're saying nice things about someone for the purpose of gaining an advantage. Proverbs chapter 29 and verse 5. If you go up to the book of Proverbs, I could have spent the whole lesson just picking verses out of the book of Proverbs on speech. But I like how concise Psalm 12 is. But Proverbs 29 has a great verse there, some great wisdom about flattery. Proverbs chapter 29 and verse 5. A man who flatters his neighbor is spreading a net for his steps. He thinks he's getting a compliment and makes him feel nice. It kind of puffs him up a little bit. But really, he's setting a net. It's a trap. He's trying to gain something, trying to get something out of that interaction. It's very self-driven. Like our first point, flattery is empty of truth. In Isaiah chapter 30 and verse 10, it's kind of the Old Testament equivalent of what Paul said, that people have itching ears. You know, they don't love the truth. They have itching ears, and they want their ears to be tickled by something that sounds good, but isn't necessarily truthful. Isaiah chapter 30 and verse 10. For this is a rebellious people, false sons who refuse to listen to the instruction of the Lord, who say to the seers, you must not see visions, and to the prophets, you must not prophesy to us what is right. Speak to us pleasant words. Prophesy illusions. Jeremiah chapter 5 and verse 31. God condemns the prophets who speak falsely. He says, and my people love it so. Flattery works both ways. Sometimes we like to hear things, oh boy, I know that's not true, but it makes me feel good to hear it. There's the other side of flattery as well. We need to be watching out for this smooth talk. When we look in the New Testament, it's often linked with false teachers. They use flattery, again, to gain their advantage. It's not so much that you intellectually agree with what they're saying. It's more that you're attached to them emotionally. Because they flattered you, they built this relationship, and then now you kind of take them at their word without really scrutinizing what they're saying. Jude verse 16, we'll look at that before we go on to our next point. Jude verse 16, I was going to say chapter 1, but if you found Jude chapter 2, you're in the wrong Bible. So Jude verse 16, these are grumblers, finding fault, following after their own lusts. They speak arrogantly, flattering people for the sake of gaining an advantage. We need to watch ourselves. Our interactions with people, we better be sure we're dealing with them straight. We're not trying to say things, compliment them, even if we don't believe it. I don't like this person, but I got to say nice things, to get their favor. I need something from them later, so I want to be on their good side. I'm not saying you just speak the truth harshly and go and say mean things all the time, but let's watch out for flattering. And on the other side of that, let's be sure that we're watching out for this, that we're not just being flattered, we're not just listening for something that sounds good to us, but isn't based on truth. That's kind of a common theme through here. And all these points, the lack of truth. And here's where we get lying. Here's where we get deceit. Finishing out verse 2, with flattering lips and with a double heart they speak. This is deception. The NIV says they speak with deception. The King James, or New King James says with a double heart. This is the idea of speaking out of both sides of your face. You'll compliment somebody. It's very much like flattering. You'll say something nice to them when they're there, and as soon as they turn around and walk away, you'll say to your friend, I can't stand that person. I can't stand them, Oh, yeah, good to see you. You're looking great, Oh, man, they put on pounds, You say one thing to their face, and again, do you see how this can happen on Facebook? The way you deal with people, you deal with them in two different ways, two different hearts. You're kind to their face, but speak evil things behind their back. That's just not right. And that's a characteristic that reveals a corrupted heart. It shows that something's not right. In Matthew chapter 5, in verse 37, you'll recognize these words, but I hope you'll let them sink in deep. For someone who claims to be a disciple of Christ, if your speech, if your interactions with other people fall short of truthful and straightforward, you aren't a disciple of Christ. Matthew 5 and verse 37. But let your statement be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything beyond this is of evil. That's our standard. We look for straightforward conduct with people. When we tell them we're going to do something, we do it. We don't make promises, even though we know I'm not going to keep that promise. Yeah, I'll be there. I won't. We deal with them straight. There's no two hearts there. There's no two sides to us. We are straightforward with people, and that's anything beyond that, anything that falls short of straightforward conduct, that's evil. That's what Jesus said. So we don't want to be double-hearted. We don't want to speak one thing to their face and then talk trash about them behind their back. They're boastful. Verse 3, may the Lord cut off all flattering lips, the tongue that speaks great things, who have said, with our tongue we will prevail. Our lips are our own. Who is Lord over us? See, this is just a complete rejection of accountability, that there's no higher authority than us. There's this overconfidence, this arrogance that we can talk ourselves out of any situation. We can talk our way out of any corner, Have you ever done this? I feel like this will probably strike a chord with some people. Have you ever done something that you know was wrong, and you're already thinking, how am I going to cover for this? What's going to be my story? How am I going to tell my wife? What am I going to tell her that will hide what I'm doing? What's the story? What's the spin when I come home and my parents ask me? I can't tell them the truth, so you're already working on the lie before you even have a chance to tell it. That's overconfidence. You think, I'll never get found out. I have no accountability. I can talk about this person behind their back. I can gossip about them. They'll never know it was me. I guarantee you, at some point, they're going to find out. People know who the gossips are. And your circle of life, your circle of friends at work, do you know who the gossip is in the office? You're not the only one. Everyone knows who the gossip is. Among your friends, among the people you're close with, you know who the gossip is. And so, I don't know, you can't hide things. There's this overconfidence in your ability to talk yourself out of bad situations. People wonder why my relationships are falling apart, why they're disintegrating, being destroyed, why my friendships have grown cold, and all the while, they're saying bad things. They're gossiping about these people behind their backs, and they're thinking, what's going wrong with my relationships? Well, it's because you think they don't know what you're saying, but people know. People figure this out. They always know what's going on. So there's this idea of boastfulness, overconfidence, and malicious. Not all versions of the Bible out there read it this way as saying malicious, but that's the thought. In my Bible, it says here in verse 5, because of the devastation of the afflicted, because of the groaning of the needy, now I will arise, says the Lord. I will set him in the safety for which he longs. This is God's response, but notice what he says about those who have been affected by the speech of the wicked. Devastation. So what if I tell a little lie? Who am I hurting? So what if I flatter somebody? They want my honest opinion, and I can't tell them I think they're wrong. So I just tell them, oh, you're fine. You keep doing what you're doing, even though you're setting them up for failure. So what if I, have a little bit of double talk or a little bit of empty speech? So what if I don't always say the truth? So what if I talk about people behind their back? What's the damage? What's the hurt? You know what God is saying here is this devastates lives. Words can do harm. That's the point. When you look at James chapter 3, he makes this illustration. Look at what one little spark, one little ember can do. For those here that drove out from here to Oregon for summer camp last year, we saw the devastation of what a little spark can do. All the fires that were going around. It was just incredible when you see wildfires and know that sometimes it starts from just one little spark, one little ember. You see all the devastation Hitler accomplished through the words he spoke. Words have power to damage. They are harmful. We need to get out of the gossip game, get out of those circles, cut the grapevines, sever them. Don't participate. Another great proverb, Proverbs 26 and verse 20. Get out of the gossip game. You know who the gossips are, and the thing is, you're talking with them, you're getting all the good stuff on other people. They're telling others about you. I promise you. They're not the kind of people you want to associate with. When you hear gossip, you stop it at you. You say, that's it. I don't want to hear this. You keep that stuff to yourself. That's not good what you're doing. Proverbs 26 and verse 20, for lack of wood the fire goes out, and where there is no whisperer, contention quiets down. When people aren't passing along the secrets, the little juicy tidbits on other people's lives, it says contention, quarreling, fighting, strife disappears. For lack of wood, the fire goes out. I'm not going to throw another log on this fire. I'm going to have no part in gossip. Someone comes to me, they want to tell me something about someone else. Stop right there. This is malicious. This is harmful. Words do hurt. Words can cause damage. And that's what God acknowledges here. For those who have been harmed by words, God says, I'm here. I'm your safety. I'm your comfort. You have been harmed, but God has the ability to heal us. So we haven't been damaged too bad, but God acknowledges words can hurt. So does this look like you? Does this characterize you? Any one of these points? Do you sometimes talk without really thinking? Is it truthful? Am I just sounding like, little sound bites? People do that all the time politically. They just kind of quote one thing or another, and it's clear you haven't really studied it. You just kind of heard a few sound points on one news channel or the other, and that's empty talk. I don't really know the truth of the matter. I don't know the facts or the information, but I can regurgitate things I've heard. Does that sound like you? Do you flatter people? Are you susceptible to being flattered? I know it's not truthful, but I like the sound of it, so I'll go along with it. Do you deceive people? Are you double-hearted, saying one thing to their face and another thing behind their back? You boastful, you crafting lies to get yourself out of bad situations, and gossiping, hurting people. Does that characterize you? That should be scary. That should be scary, because this is an indication that something's wrong in your heart. Matthew chapter 12. In Matthew chapter 12, Jesus compares it. It's like fruit on a tree. I don't know a whole lot about trees. I can kind of tell when something's a pine tree or an oak tree, but I don't know. Beyond that, I don't really know a whole lot of details. But when there's fruit on the tree, well, that's an apple tree because I see the apples. That's an orange tree because I see oranges. I can tell it by its fruit. Same thing with language. What kind of person are you? Are you wicked or are you a good person? Are you of this world or are you of God? You can tell by the fruit. If that's what you sound like, it tells you where your heart's at. You might say you're a Christian. You might have deceived yourself into thinking you're a Christian or a child of God. But if that's the way you talk, well, listen to the words of Jesus in Matthew chapter 12. I'm going to begin in verse 35. The good man out of his good treasure brings forth what is good, and the evil man out of his evil treasure brings forth what is evil. And I say to you that every careless word that men shall speak, they shall render account for it in the day of judgment. The words we say are just an indication on the outside of what's going on in our hearts. So be warned. As we wrap the lesson up, the words of the Lord, this is wonderful. He says in verse 6, they are pure, refined. Here's the idea of purification. When it comes to metals, to get rid of the dross, the impurities, imperfections, you burn it. Intense heat, you melt it down, it burns away all the flaws. Other translations actually say the words of God are flawless. That's the kind of speech we should strive for, flawless. I don't know that we'll ever achieve flawless speech, but that's what we're aiming for, is flawless speech, purified speech. If we're going to speak the words of God, if we're going to speak in a godly way, in a way that shows us we have a God-fearing heart, well, our words need to be subjected to a purification process. Again, this means thinking about what you say before you open your mouth. That's a hard one. But if you learn that, you'll save yourself from a lot of trouble. That'll make a big difference in your life. If you can just learn to stop and just think, what am I about to say? Is it going to help the situation? Is it going to make things better? Is it going to be something that's truthful, or is it just going to be empty chatter? Is there no purpose to saying what I'm about to say? Then keep your mouth shut. James chapter 3 also talks about the illustration of a bridle in the horse's mouth, a bit in the horse's mouth. One little thing can lead the horse, and we need to learn to purify our words, subject it to this scrutinizing process, think about what we say before we say it, bridle our words, not just speak because of our emotions, not just whatever comes, out of our mouth as whatever we say. Well, I know I said some bad words, but it's just because I was really excited. I was really upset, or I was really frustrated. That makes it okay, I guess. No, we need to think about what we're saying before we say it. Invaluable words. Pure silver. It's not just pure, but it's also valuable. There's kind of a correlation between something being valuable and also being rare. I think the same holds up when it comes to words. The fewer, the better. Something is often valuable because it's scarce. Again, in the book of Proverbs, chapter 17 this time, and verse 27, this is something I realized when it came to coffee drinking. In the wintertime when it's cold, I like just, hot cup of coffee in my hand at all times pretty much. So coffee maker, I'd brew a 12-cup pot, and throughout the day I just keep filling my mug, and by the end of the day I drank a whole pot. And I got a lot of friends that did that, and when they're older, their doctors say no more coffee. You got to quit it altogether. You got high blood pressure. Like, I don't want that, so I need to drink less. So I started to realize that, when I bought all different kinds of, I got a French press and a Chemex for all you coffee nerds out there. And it's a way to make one cup of coffee at a time, but it tastes so much better because you put a lot more care and a lot more thought and a lot more preparation. So it's a lot more satisfying experience. And I'm fine with just 1 or 2 cups in a day because I put a lot more thought into it, a lot more effort and preparation. Same thing is true of words. You don't need to say as many words when you think about what you're saying. Fewer is better. Less is more. That's what my dad always used to say. Proverbs 17 and verse 27. He who restrains his words has knowledge, and he who has a cool spirit is a man of understanding. Even a fool, when he keeps silent, is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is counted prudent. And one final verse is Ephesians chapter 4. The point I want to leave you with, basically, you ever notice how we talk about bad words? We teach our kids, that's a bad word, you shouldn't say it. You ever notice how in the Bible there's not a verse that says, here's the list of, 13 bad words you should never say? That's not the way the Bible works. The Bible says you can either be like the world or you can be like God, and they're at opposite ends of the spectrum. It's not about finding the line where as long as I'm one step on this side of it, then I'm okay. It's about seeing God and going as close to him as you can get. In Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 29, let no unwholesome word proceed from your mouth, but only such a word as is good for edification, according to the need of the moment, that it may give grace to those who hear. It's a word that imparts something, that has value, worth. No unwholesome word. It's not just a simple question of what words are bad, what words are good. It's, I don't want to be anywhere close. I don't want to sound like the world at all. I don't want to say any word that's going to make me sound more like someone of this world. I want to say only words that give grace, only words that help. Again, flawless speech may be impossible for faulty human beings like you and I, but that's our standard, that's our goal, that's our aim, is flawless speech, no unwholesome words. And God also makes some promises here in verse 7. I'm going to keep you safe, I'm going to protect you, I'm going to rescue you. And God keeps his promises. We want to be dependable. Again, in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus said, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Be a man, be a woman of your word. Be dependable. Speak only those words that are dependable. Now, the scripture I want to leave you with before we sing the invitation song, I started somewhere a little bit odd. I'm going to end somewhere a little bit odd. Nehemiah was a time of restoration, but they had made some mistakes. He found out that in those days, Nehemiah said, I also saw that the Jews had married women from Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. Those are nations God specifically said, don't marry with them or you'll be corrupted. You'll learn their ways, they'll pull you away from me. As for their children, half spoke in the language of Ashdod, and none of them was able to speak the language of Judah, but the language of his own people. That's what I fear is going on with Christians in the world today. They wear the name Christian, but the way they talk reveals them to be something totally different. When we don't teach our children the type of words of God, words that are pure, words that are valuable, words that are dependable, they speak the language of Ashdod. Not literally, but you understand the point I'm making. What's the harm? And I don't know, maybe my speech isn't perfect. Maybe I don't always have to say the best words. Sometimes my language could be a little crude or foul. What's the big deal? Well, when the words of God are foreign to you, that's a big deal. That was a big problem in Nehemiah's day. The words of God were foreign to them. All they knew were the words of the nations around them. So when it came to their own scriptures, when it came to their own God, it was like reading another language. They were clueless. So I hope this has been helpful to you. I hope you'll give some thought and work on bridling the tongue, giving some thought before you speak, before you type, before you talk to other people. Am I saying something that's wholesome, that's going to be beneficial? This hasn't been a lesson on how to become a Christian, but we're going to sing an invitation song, and if you need help, if you need prayers, you need encouragement, more instruction, what you need to do to become a disciple of Christ, we invite you to come forward now as we stand and sing.